as close to 12 o'clock as we can. So welcome to those of you that have joined us here in Regina, as well as all of you who have joined us online for this rate model information session. So we have a bit of an agenda for us today, a few introductory comments, and then we'll share with you the setting of at a fairly high level, how we actually go about setting the premium rates for employers, and the impacts of the enhanced model, which became effective January 1st, 2018, as well as our plan for transitioning the implementation of the new rate model through to 2019. I'm expecting to spend roughly an hour going through the presentation. Then, of course, we would open it up for any questions that you might have. For those of you that are here, I would ask that you use the cards on your table to capture your questions and then hold those until the question and answer period before asking those. Those of you who are online can submit your questions via email through askwcb@wcbsask.com. So what do premiums actually cover? So from a worker's perspective, of course, the premiums ensure that there are sufficient funds to pay the benefits to which they would be entitled. So that would include wage loss, any medical costs associated with the injury, as well as rehabilitation costs. Employers, in agreeing to fund the compensation system for their premiums, of course, they receive the security of knowing that their employees do have an insurance program that they can fall back on should they be injured at work. And of course, through the payment of their premiums, they are also protected against legal action, lawsuit, in the event that a workplace injury does occur. The purpose of the premium rates, as I alluded to earlier, and the reason we go through the rate setting process, is to ensure that we're collecting sufficient revenue to pay for all current and future costs of injuries that will occur in that particular year. So the premium rate for 2018 is intended to cover all costs, both current and future, of all claims that will occur in 2018. So if, for example, we have a young worker, age 15, who might be seriously injured, have a permanent restriction in terms of their earning capacity, they would be entitled to benefits to the age 65. We would ensure that the premiums we're collecting in 2018 not only cover the costs that we would spend in 2018, but also those that would occur or be incurred in subsequent years. The premiums that we collect today, we would invest. And so the only sources of revenue that the Workers' Compensation Board has are those premiums, plus the investment income that we would earn off of those premiums. Of course, we don't spend all of that premium in the year of injury. It would be spread out over the duration of the claim, but notwithstanding, we are required to collect all of that premium up front. As I said, invest it in our investment portfolio, which is managed by external investment managers, and the investment income combined with the premium sufficient to pay future costs of claims. So we want to ensure one of the principles within our workers' compensation system is that the employers of today pay for the costs of injuries that would occur today. The premium is really made up of two elements, as indicated in the previous slide. Claims costs, which are estimated using an actuarial approach. And I'll get into the details about what actually goes into that approach in a few minutes. And of course, the other element that goes into calculating the premium rate is simply the payroll. The calculation of the premium rate is simply estimated claims cost divided by payroll, and then from that is calculated a premium rate, which is then charged to employers on the basis of $100 of payroll. The actuarial model is used to actually project these future costs, which is one of those key elements in terms of actually calculating the premium rate. Our journey with respect to the implementation of the enhanced model actually started back in 2015 when we hired an external actuary to conduct an asset and liability study. And the asset liability study considered two things. It considered the future claims costs, the estimation of our benefits liability, if you will, as well as the investment returns that we would earn on that portfolio. In late 2015, we received that report. In the spring of 2016, they started their work. In October of 2016, we shared in our regular rate-setting consultation meetings the result of that study, as well as the recommendations that came out of the actuarial study as it related to enhancing the rate model. So out of the asset liability study came a recommendation, some recommendations relating to our investment portfolio. As it related to our premium rates, the actuary said you should review your rate setting model. We undertook that review, reported that out initially in October of 2016. Then November, December of 2016, we had regional meetings across the province where at a very high level we shared our plans with respect to changes to the rate-making model. Excuse me, in February and March of 2017, we held industry-specific meetings to educate employers within those industry groups of the changes to the rate-making model and the impacts that it would have on them and our plan for transitioning the implementation of the new model. Again, in October of 2017, we shared this information together with our plan in terms of transitioning to the new model at our regular rate setting meetings in October. January 1st of 18, the implementation of the new model for purposes of calculating the 2018 rates, again subject to the transition plan, which I'll go through in a little more detail. And that led to these particular industry meetings. As a result of introducing the enhanced model, there were 14 industry rate codes that were negatively impacted as a result of the changes made to the model. And the board decided to implement a transition plan to allow those industries to actually plan for what might be coming in 2019. And we felt it important to meet with each of the individual industry rate codes that were negatively impacted. There were 14 of them. So over the last, yesterday and today and tomorrow, we will have met with the individual industry rate codes impacted by the model and share the comparison of what would your rates have been under the old model together with what your rate is or would have been under the enhanced model, and then what the transition to the new model would involve. As we approach rate setting, there are 5 principles that we try and keep to the forefront of whatever it is that we're doing with respect to the rate-making model that we are establishing. Workers' compensation is like any other insurance program in that there is an element of collective liability that is inherent in the insurance system itself. So if we think about our own home insurance or our car insurance, we are put in risk pools, if you will. We are grouped with homeowners who have similar homes to us. We are, with respect to auto insurance, we're grouped with other auto owners who have the same type of vehicle that we have. And together that risk pool shares in all of the costs associated with all of the claims that occur to anybody in that risk pool. That same concept applies to workers' compensation. So in Saskatchewan, we have taken all industries that are required to be covered by the Workers' Compensation Board and grouped them into 50 different rate codes. Every employer in each of the respective rate codes pays the same base premium rate based on the collective liability of all employers in that rate code. So we need to maintain that collective liability, the sharing of risks, the sharing of costs. At the same time, we want to have a certain amount of accountability for the employers that are in those respective groups so that their individual experience is not totally hidden by pooling all of the risks with everyone else who happened to be in that rate code. So we're constantly trying to balance these two, what are often seen as competing principles. One, we need to maintain this collective liability so there is a sharing of the risks and the costs. At the same time, we want enough accountability at the individual rate code level to reflect that individual rate code level's experience. On the other side, we want to balance providing stable premium rates with having a rate model that is reactive enough to reflect the current or as current injury experience as possible. So we don't want the model to react too much because then we create volatility in the premium rates. Employers don't like unstable rates. I, as an insurer, don't like providing unstable rates, and I, as a policyholder on my private insurance, don't like when the rates bounce all over the place. So we're trying to avoid rates going very high and then going very low and provide more stability. Those four principles combined with developing a rate model that is transparent, easy to understand, and relatively easy to communicate were the 5 things that we set out trying to achieve as we looked at changes that we might make to our rate-making model. So we wanted to be sure that we maintained those fundamental principles as we moved forward. So what were the enhancements made to the rate-making model, and really what are they all about? So the first thing the actuary addressed when he conducted his review was this issue of credibility of industries. Credibility simply means the degree to which we can rely on past experience to predict future experience. In Saskatchewan, we have many, many small businesses that go into the makeup of several of our rate codes. Those businesses and those industries would not have huge claim volumes and would be very, very volatile in their claim experience from one year to the next. So, you know, small employers might go years without having an injury, and then all of a sudden they could have 1 or 2 very serious injuries. And so if the industry isn't large enough to absorb that, we would consider them not to be credible, and therefore their past experience not very reliable in predicting future experience. So the actuary wanted to address that. Now the way that we had addressed that through our rate-making, the old rate-making model, is we would calculate the credibility of an industry on the basis of the size of their payroll. And then we would supplement or blend that industry experience with the overall experience at the board level. And when I say board level, what I'm meaning is we have 50 industry codes that include all of the employers that report to the board. When I say board level, I'm talking about the injury experience and claim experience of all 50 of those rate codes. So if an industry was only 60% credible, we would use 60% of the industry's experience, and we would blend that with 40% of the overall experience of all 50 rate codes to come up with what their expected future costs might be. The actuary said that doesn't really do much in terms of accountability for that particular industry because you're relying on all the other industries to somewhat subsidize or minimize the impact of the individual industry experience using other industries' experience. The actuary said in order to maintain a collective liability as well as provide for accountability at the individual rate code level, that where an industry is not considered credible, not large enough to the point where their past experience can be used to predict their future experience, instead of using just 5 years of claims cost experience, which is what we have done and will continue to do moving forward, so we basically calculate the 5-year average of the previous 5 years of claims, and we use that 5-year average to predict the future. If an industry is not fully credible, we would use that 5-year experience, but then we would expand it and blend it with their 10-year experience. Under the new model, credibility will be determined by claims costs. So an industry would be considered 100% credible or reliable in terms of past experience predicting future experience if they have $16.5 million or more in claims costs flowing through their rate code. An industry that has about $10 million, so in that case, if an industry is considered 100% credible, we would use the average of their most recent fully completed 5 years of claims experience. If an industry only has $10 million in claims costs going through it over that 5-year period, they would be considered only 60% credible. So we would use 60% of their 5-year average, and then we would blend that with 40% of their 10-year average to come up with the claims for that, or claims costs for that particular period, which then would be used to predict future costs. Oops. The other element is the use of indicators to predict costs. So under the old model, we would calculate the 5-year average of claims costs, and then we would look at injury frequency or injury rates to adjust that 5-year average for what we're seeing in terms of injury trends. So with the steady decreases in injury rates, what that model would have done would have assumed that the claims costs for that 5-year average period are going to decrease in the future because the frequency of claims is going down. When the actuary actually did the analysis and compared injury frequency to claims costs, there was no longer a correlation between the two. As a matter of fact, they were going in opposite directions. Injury frequency, injury rates were declining rapidly, but at the same time, claims costs were increasing. So to use injury rates or injury frequency to adjust, to forecast future costs was no longer reliable. We recognized that, and as a mitigating effort, what we were doing is we were actually averaging the premium rates. So we would calculate the premium rate for the coming year. We would then take the premium rate from the previous year, and we would average those two to come up with the premium rate for this year. The actuary said that's not very scientific and not very supportable. What we should be doing is, first of all, get rid of that averaging. Let the rate stand as the rate ought to be using a model that better predicts future costs. What the actuary found is there's a strong correlation between claims costs and change in the workforce. So the actuary recommended, and the board accepted, the recommendation that we no longer use injury frequency to forecast future claims costs, but we now use the change in workforce to predict what the future costs would be. So if we see, through payrolls reported to us in the calculation of full-time equivalents, for example, a 5% increase in the workforce covered by workers' compensation, we would assume that costs in the future are going to increase by 5%. No more averaging, and use the change in the workforce to estimate what the future costs or adjust what the future costs would be. Under claims cost pooling, under the existing model, on a rate code basis, so in the S category, so this afternoon, I should say, we're talking to 3 codes that belong to an S class. So I think we're talking about S11, S12, and S41 this afternoon. This morning, we talked to 3 other S codes. In total, there are 8 industry codes that make up this S class. Under the current model, or the old model, what we were doing is we were capping the costs of the long-term earnings replacement or pension claims at $90,000. So if an individual employer had a long-term earning replacement or pension claim, once the costs hit $90,000, we capped those costs at $90,000, and then we took the difference between the actual claims costs and the cap, and we would spread that among all 8 industry codes within the S class. The actuary suggested that 2 things. Number one, the $90,000 had been in place for a long, long time, had never ever been adjusted. The actuary did not believe that that was a reasonable approach to take because, of course, wages and other things are actually changing that might have an impact on that cap. What the actuary recommended and the board accepted was there's a better balance if we tie the maximum claims cost cap to the maximum insurable wage or maximum wage rate. So since 2014, the maximum wage rate has been increasing annually to get us to the point that by January 2019, the maximum wage rate will equal 165% of the average weekly wage, and then be indexed after that by CPI. So as the maximum steadily increases, the actuary says your claims cost cap should increase. So based on the maximum wage rate for 2018, which is just over $82,000, the actuary said we should apply 3 times that maximum in establishing the maximum claims cost cap. So 3 times 82 roughly equals $252,500 and change. The actuary also said you should no longer pool at the class level, but you should pool at the overall board level among all 50 rate codes. So if you have a claim, not just a pension claim, any claim, because the actuary also said restricting the claims cost capping only to pension claims is not right. It should apply to everybody, regardless of the kind of claim that it is. So if the cost of a claim exceeds $252,000 in my example, the difference between the total cost of claim and the 252 cap will then be pooled at the board level among all 50 rate codes, and each rate code will take a proportion of that pooled cost into their own experience based on their claim experience. So no longer just applying that at the class level. So the S codes, the 8 S codes in the S class will no longer be bearing the pooled amount of the members within the S class. That will go up to the board. They'll now take a smaller proportion of the overall pooled costs from all industries. Next, the actuary talked about allocation of fatality costs. So under the current model, based on a 10-year fatality cost average, every rate code picks up a portion of the fatality costs whether they had a fatality or not. The actuary said, again, that really takes away from the accountability of the industries who are actually having the fatalities. So the actuary recommended that the cost of fatalities actually be borne by the industry that actually had the fatalities, subject to the same claim cost cap that would apply to any other claim. So if an industry code has a fatality, the costs of which are less than $252,000, the industry would bear 100% of those costs in calculating their premium rate. If the cost of the fatality would exceed $250,000, the difference between the cost of the fatality and the $250,000 again would be pooled at the board level and shared across all 50 rate codes based on that industry's claims experience relative to the overall board experience. Creates greater accountability at the industry level for the fatalities, but also maintains a collective liability concept as well. Long-term claims. So under the current model, or the old model I should say, we calculated these 5-year averages based on claims costs paid in that particular calendar year for all claims paid in that calendar year, regardless of when the injury actually occurred. So because we could have an injured worker who's entitled to receive benefits for 50 years, age 15 to age 65, potentially you could still see claims costs coming through in the current year that relate to an injury that occurred 20, 30, 40 years ago. That masking of current experience by bringing old claims experience into it does not make the model very reactive. What the actuary recommended and what was accepted is we will, for every calendar year within the rate calculation year, so we use 5-year average in calculating 2018 premium rates. We use the last 5 fully completed years of experience. We're going to go 2016, 15, 14, 13, 12. So we would look at all claims paid in 2012, in 2013, 14, 15, 16, and calculate an average, and that average would be used to forecast future costs. Under the old model, we would take all costs paid in 2012, even if it was a 1940 injury. Under the new model, we will cut those costs off after 7 years. So in 2012, we will only take costs into the calculation of the average that are 7 years old, no older than that. The same thing for 13, 14, 15, and 16. So using 7 years of claim cost experience in each of the previous 5 calendar years, we now calculate this average. There are still costs in those subsequent years, beyond year 7. What we'll do is we'll take the remaining costs, again, pool those at the board level, and distribute them among all rate codes based on their individual claims experience. Lastly, allocation of administrative costs. So for many years, the assumption in the rate-making model was that our administrative costs were split 90% variable and 10% fixed. Variable cost would be, under our definition, a cost that's related to the handling of claims. And in our case, in the majority, it's the salaries of people that handle claims. The fixed costs would be the costs that aren't directly related to the handling of claims, but are necessary in order to keep the place running and do other things that we have to do. So things like our IT systems and support, our HR support mechanism, registration of employers, and those other activities that aren't directly related to the managing of claims. The actuary asked us to go and actually analyze our administrative costs to determine whether the 90-10 split was still appropriate. When we went and analyzed that, what we discovered was 70% of our costs are actually variable and 30% of our costs are fixed. The way we distribute the fixed costs is we allocate those fixed costs among the rate codes based on their proportion of payroll. The variable costs are allocated to industry codes on the basis of the proportion of their claims costs. The theory being that if you've got higher claims experience, you're drawing more on the variable costs, and therefore we would distribute on the basis of claims costs. On the other hand, fixed costs are costs that all industry rate codes should share proportionately because it's necessary in order to keep the system going. So shifting, we're still going to proceed with the same way we allocate among rate codes, but now the proportion of fixed to variable has changed. Because there were 14 industry codes negatively impacted by the introduction of the enhanced model, the board introduced a transition for 2018 only. And what the transition did was for industry rate codes whose premium rates were going up because of the enhanced model, that the board would take the impact of the enhanced model on the premium rates and fund that impact through the injury fund. Where the enhanced model was producing no change in the premium rate or a lower premium rate, we actually passed that on, used the enhanced model to set the premium rate for 2018. Come January 1st, 2019, all premium rates will be established using the enhanced model. There will no longer be the application of any transition in the establishment of 2019 and beyond premium rates. So let's have a look at a couple of examples of how the transition would work. So in the first example, the 2017 premium rate was $1. When we ran that rate through the enhanced model, it was calling for a rate of $1.30. When we ran the 2018 premium rate using the old model, it produced a rate of $1.20. So for purposes of establishing the final premium rate for 2018, employers in this rate code, fictitious rate code, would have been billed $1.20. And the difference between the $1.30 and $1.20 would have been funded through the injury fund. In the second example, if there's increases, no change, or a decrease in the old model. So if the new model produced, the enhanced model produced an increase, or if there was no change or a decrease in the old model, we took a different approach. So again, in our example, if the premium rate for 17 was $1, the new premium rate for 2018 using the enhanced model called for $1.05. But when we ran the 2018 model using the old model, it actually produced a decrease in the premium rate of, let's say, 80 cents. What we've decided is we are not going to, and when we went out with the transition plan, the intention was if there was a decrease generated, we would give you that decrease under the old model. But as we consulted with industry groups, industry said to us, we don't want you to do that. Because all you're going to do is you're going to drop our rate, in my example, from $1 down to 80 cents, and then the next year you're going to take me up to $1.05. Just leave me where I am. So in cases where the new model called for an increase, the old model called for a decrease in the premium rate, we've simply maintained the premium rate for 2017. So let's take a look at the overall, just went over all that. Let's take a look at the impact on the individual rate codes. So S11, which are the legal and financial offices, with respect to the change in credibility, the way we're handling credibility, really no impact on the industry. Very small increase that would have been generated. but it's so small it didn't even round to a penny. So far below half a cent. So really no impact on the premium rate. Similarly, with the change in indicators using workforce compared to time loss claim counts, no impact. Dropping the average of the premium rates in this particular element would have decreased the premium rate, but adopting the workforce would have increased their offsetting, and so there actually no net impact. Costly claim pooling. So in S11, the average pension costs in S11 were 100% lower than the average for the S industry. So what that means is S11 was subsidizing some of the other seven S rate codes for pension costs in excess of $90,000. Under the new model, with the increase in the maximum to $252,000, they are no longer subsidizing at the class level. If the costs are below $252,000, they're not subsidizing anything. If the costs are above $252,000, they're now sharing at the board level as opposed to the class level. The net result of that is a decrease of 2 cents. Holding industries more accountable, although this sector over the last 5 years did have one fatality. Holding industry rate codes more accountable for their own fatalities resulted in a decrease in the fatality element of the rate by 3 cents. The long-term claims, this particular rate code had lower claims costs in the years beyond year 7. So under the old model, we were calculating an average using however many years there were claims costs paid in that calendar year. In this particular rate code, for years 8 and beyond, those costs were lower than the average for the 7 years. And so by removing that average, it actually had the effect of adding a penny to the premium rate. The administration costs, really what this means is S11 was not picking up its share of the fixed costs. As a result of increasing our fixed administrative costs at 30% from the 20%, based on the payroll of S11's premium rate would have gone up by 6 cents. So under the old model, the premium rate would have 15 cents, 17 cents under the enhanced model, a difference of 2 cents. The 2017 premium rate was 15 cents for this rate code. The old model, had we run that for 2018, held the rate at 15 cents. The new model called for a 17-cent premium rate. The decision of what we billed this rate code for 2018 was to hold it at the 2018 level of 15 cents, and this 2-cent difference will be covered through the injury fund. When we look at S12, which are the other offices, similar impact as it relates to credibility and change in indicators, really no net impact on this particular rate code. Claims cost pooling, a similar story. Their pension costs were 72% below the industry average. So when we hold the other S codes more accountable through a higher claims cost cap on all claims, it actually had the effect of reducing the claims cost pooling by a penny. Fatality, similarly, the change in the fatality principle had the result of reducing fatalities by 3 cents. Same story with respect to long-term claims. The long-term average was less than the current average, and therefore removing that had the effect of adding a penny. And very similar outcome with respect to the administration costs, an increase of 5 cents. Now, I don't want the lawyers launching a class action or anything by noticing that when we looked at the S11 code, their element for administration costs was 6 cents. And now when we go and look at the other offices, we're only charging them 5 cents. The difference is simply in the rounding and the way that these elements were actually calculated. But it's Exact same principle. One of the differences could be in the relative size of payroll for S11 versus S12. Might be picking up an extra penny. So the 2017 premium rate was 23 cents. Continuing to run the old model, we'll have held that rate at 23. Using the enhanced model would have called for a rate of 25 cents. We are holding the rate at 23 cents based on what the old model would have calculated. This difference of 2 cents again would have come out of the injury fund. When we look at S41, which are our engineering companies, with respect to credibility, really no change in the premium rate as a result of the change to the credibility element. When we look at the change in indicators, for this particular rate code, for S41, when we remove the time loss counts as the adjuster for average costs and put in the change in workforce, so time loss injuries have been decreasing in this rate code. So when we looked at this in the old model, we would have assumed that there would have been steady, slight decreases in their costs moving forward. But when we look at the change in the workforce, this particular rate code has seen a steady increase in the workforce. And so when we apply the workforce indicator to this, it has the effect of actually increasing the costs calculated, and that's why we would see a 2-cent increase in the premium rate. With respect to claim cost pooling, same story. This particular rate code was not a big user of pension costs in excess of $90,000. By removing that, it actually lessens the burden on this premium rate to the tune of 2 cents. Fatality, similar story, reducing or eliminating the fatality averaging and holding industries more accountable for their own fatalities, result in a decrease of 2 cents. No impact on the longer-term claims. The short and long-term averages are very similar, so there was no impact of removing those. And a very similar story, or the same story, with respect to the administration costs. Based on their payroll, they're picking up a percentage of a larger percentage of fixed costs. The overall costs have not changed. It's just the way we have now split the cost between fixed and variable. So we're not increasing the size of the pot, we're just shifting the fixed component from 10% to 30% because it's more representative of how our actual administration costs are spent. So for this rate code, their 17 rate was 33 cents. The old model would have driven a decrease of a penny down to 32 cents. The enhanced model would call for a rate of 35 cents. Their 2018 premium rate was set at 33 cents. The 2-cent difference between 35 and 33 would be absorbed, that deficiency would be absorbed through the injury fund as with the other rate codes. So, what might this look like moving forward? So if everything stayed exactly the same for 2019 as what we've seen in setting the 2018 premium rates. Remember, the new model takes effect for everyone on January 1st, 2019. So there's no longer any transition. You just get the rate, whatever the rate is calculated by the enhanced model. So if payrolls don't change, if experience doesn't change, S11's rate for 2019 would be 17 cents. So immediately start off at 17 cents. S12 would move to 25 cents, and S41 would move to 35 cents because we're removing the impact of the transition. Now, if experience deteriorates or if payrolls deteriorate, these will change as well. So this is just a really high level, for instance, here's what you might be facing, or the minimum of what you might be facing in 2019. Now, on the other hand, if claims experience improves, payrolls grow higher, and claims experience stays the same, that could have a positive effect and mitigate the impacts of moving to the enhanced model. So what's next? The This presentation, as well as the other ones that were done, have been recorded and will be available on our website for those who couldn't join us today who might want to go and learn a little bit more about it. We'll open up questions to the floor in a minute, as well as through our email, which is askwcb@wcbsask.com. So those of you who have joined us online, feel free to submit your questions. However, if later, you're at home, you're sitting in your office, and you think of something that you should have asked while you were here, any and all of you, feel free to email it to that askwcb@wcbsask.com, and we will be sure to respond to your questions within the week. In October 2018, based on 100% use of the enhanced model, we will be sharing our preliminary rates for 2019 with all of you. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone about the need to stay committed to injury prevention and return to work. Of course, the impacts of the model on premium rates can be mitigated to the extent that injuries are prevented. However, in the case when an injury does occur, having policies and programs and procedures in place to mitigate the impacts of the injury by returning workers safely and quickly to work. WorkSafe has resources. If your industry has a safety association, they have resources to assist you in the development of safety programs and or return to work policies and programs as well. There is really not an acceptable number of injuries, and so Mission Zero is as important today as it ever has been. Return to work continues to be a focus of ours in terms of reducing the impacts of workplace injuries on both the employers from a premium perspective, but as well as the individual who's had their life disrupted because of a workplace injury. At this time, I'd like to open it up for any questions submitted online or any questions from those of you who are in attendance today. Those of you that are here, I would ask that you use the floor mic to put forward your questions so that those who are joining us, I should say, online can hear both the question and the answer. Alicia, anything online? No questions online. Of course, if we can, assist in, helping you explain this, I appreciate that quite a bit of information gone through in a relatively short period of time here today. There are additional resources available on our website. When we did the educational sessions in 2016 and 17, those two were recorded and available on our YouTube channel as well as our website. So of course there's always the opportunity to watch those at your convenience and learn in a little greater detail all of the ins and outs of the various enhancements that have been made to the model. Or of course you could contact our account managers in our prevention services, employer services, for resources that might be available to come out and speak to you and explain, help you understand the changes that have been made to the model and help you with any programming needs that you might have. We have a question online.
The question is from Crystal. Under the new system, will there continue to be experience rate discounts and surcharges?
Yes. So I didn't address that today, but all we were talking about here is the establishment of the base premium rate. So once the base premium rate has been established for an industry rate code, we then apply the experience rating. The discounts in the large employer advanced program, I should say, remain at up to 200%. The surcharge remains at up to 200%, the discount at 30%. For the small employer group, discount remains at 25%, and the surcharge at 75%. So no changes in the experience rating model at all. They'll just be applied after these premium rates. So individual employers' experience will continue to be recognized through the experience rating program. Any other questions? Well, not hearing or seeing any. Just like to thank all of you for joining us, both online and here in person. And again, if questions do occur to you, feel free to email those to askwcb@wcbsas.com, and we'd be happy to respond to you. Those who are traveling, safe travels. A little blustery out there. Have a great day, and of course, happy Valentine's Day to all of you.